You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farrow.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to Lee, a Labour seat for nearly 100 years before Boris Johnson turned it blue. Whoever wins the keys to number 10 will need to keep it Conservative. Can Liz Truss do that? Well, tonight she'll be facing our viewers here in Lee. You are watching GB News and this is the People's Forum with Liz Truss, live from Lee. Our GB News viewers here in Lee. So first up, it's Brian Sheeran. Brian, come to the microphone and put your question to Liz Truss.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to Lee.
Great to be here.
OK, we lent you our vote in 2019, in my view, for three reasons. One, a lot of people were really upset that a liberal left element was trying to undermine the Brexit result. Secondly, a big blonde, bubbly guy called Marmite Boris managed to get very, very popular. Perhaps it's somewhat waned now, but at the time he was popular and he had a clear vision for the country. And third, your biggest asset was your opposition was Jeremy Corbyn, who wasn't particularly popular. But you don't have any of those three advantages in the next election. This town is on its backside. The cost of living is going through the roof. We've been promised levelling up. We don't see a lot of it. We understand that there's been a pandemic, but unless you can convince us that you're going to give us what you promised, next time, I'm voting for Joe Platt again. So what are you going to do to give Lee what you promised it?
Well, Brian, the reality is that the Labour Party let down Lee for years and years and years. You had Andy Burnham as your MP, but what did he ever deliver for this town? And I know, I grew up in Leeds in the north of England, wrong side of the Pennines, I appreciate that. Forgive me for that. But I know that lots of parts of the north of England were let down by successive governments. And I know that we need to deliver for you. And that means more infrastructure into this town, getting good railway services, which aren't here at the moment, improving on things like broadband, delivering mobile phone signals, all of those things. But it also means attracting enterprise and business. And what I would do is keep taxes low, get the investment in, get all of those post-Brexit reforms done, get the EU law off our statute book so we can help small businesses generate wealth and opportunity. And I'm determined to deliver. And I'm somebody that in all the jobs I've done, whether it's at the Trade Department, I delivered dozens of trade deals. At the Foreign Office, I've stood up to Putin. And I can tell you that as Prime Minister, I will make sure I deliver for Lee.
Suzanne, who, Brian, thank you very much indeed. Suzanne, who's also a GB viewer, emailed in to say, we voted to leave the EU, which Brian referred to there, but are still shackled. What will you do to focus on unleashing the continuing restraints?
So what I will do is I will get all of the EU laws off the statute books by the end of 2023, and I will replace them with much better laws here in Britain. So, for example, I was in Alderley this morning talking about how we attract more investment into our pharmaceutical industry. Because of this law we've got at the moment, Solvency II, we're not able to invest as much British money as we need to in those businesses to get those new jobs. I will change that law, unleash that investment. That will bring new jobs and opportunities here in the northwest of England. That is what I will do.
A lot of that is what you and others have called the levelling up agenda, which has been a slippery customer since 2019. You're on the record as saying...
Let's be honest.
Hang on a minute. That part of the levelling up process is getting a better deal for white working-class kids in school. That's a problem here in Lee. What specifically are you or your Education Secretary going to do about that? Robert Halfon and his committee have looked into it.
Well, what I want is every child to have the best opportunities in life. But the fact is, a third of our kids are leaving primary school without basic English and maths. So I'd make sure we had better tuition in primary school, getting all kids up to that level. I'd also open up more schools right across the country. So I support grammar schools. I went to a comprehensive myself in Leeds. My kids now attend a grammar school. I want everybody to have that opportunity wherever they are in the country. I also want new free schools so that the opportunities are here in towns like Lee, right across the northwest.
OK. Were you persuaded? Come up to the microphone. Short and sharp.
If you don't say yes, I'll have another go. That's my threat to you.
Ms Truss, I will determine that. Brian.
I've not yet made up my mind, but it was a better answer than I was expecting. There's a backhanded compliment
I'll take that.
I'll try and persuade her to hang around a little bit after the programme, and I'm sure she'll want to make sure she can move you further.
Alistair,
I'm running off after the
Brian,
programme.
thank you for a brilliant start-up.
If I could just make the point that people will only trust us when we deliver. It's when they see the new jobs, the new opportunities, the spades in the ground, when they see the town being transformed, that's when people will trust us. So I'm somebody who is absolutely focused on just getting things done, cracking through the difficulties, pushing ahead.
OK.
And I will prove it. I will prove it to you.
We were also overwhelmed with questions from people who are worried about energy bills, the cost of heating their homes come the autumn and the winter, and all of the rest of it. Neil Darwish. Where's Neil? There we are. Neil has a question for you, Liz.
Good afternoon, Liz. Welcome to Lee.
My
question to you is, basically, as a working class family that we are, the cost of the energy crisis has spiralled out of control. My bill has gone up from £180 to over £300 a month now. Expectations are, come October, it's possibly going to be over £500 a month, and then also further in January. So, as it stands now, I'm having to look for a second job for the weekends, which of course will have an impact on my family. So what are you going to do to help me as a working class person and everybody else? But also another part to my question is, I work within social housing and I'm a manager within social housing, and part and parcel of a lot of the issues and the distress that our tenants are being caused is because of the energy crisis.
It's that bad he needs a second job.
So what are you going to do to help everybody, really?
Well, first of all, I completely understand how difficult it is and that families are struggling at the moment with the cost of food, with the cost of energy, which has been going up. Firstly, I would reverse the national insurance rise, and I'd also have a temporary moratorium on the green energy levy. So from day one, families are keeping more of their own money, and they're also saving on the fuel bills.
Sorry about it. Do you literally mean from day one? Can you have an emergency budget to change the Finance Act on day one? It's got to go through 3 stages of Parliament before it becomes the new law of the land.
I will get it in as soon as possible. But
that's not day one. That's as soon as possible.
I will act on day one to make it happen as soon as possible, but it will happen well before April, which is when traditionally the tax year starts, but I will do it as soon as I can. I'll make sure the Chancellor does it as soon as he can. And my fundamental approach is that we need to keep taxes low. What we shouldn't be doing is taking money from people in taxes and then giving it back to them in benefits.
Neil, do you want a bailout now, or do you want Truss's tax cuts by April?
That's not all I'm going to do, Alistair. You haven't let me finish
that's
my
a big
answer.
thing to say, and I want his reaction.
I need something now. And I think people need something now.
That's a fault line in your campaign with Rishi. Rishi will give money to him now, you will say come April.
No, I'm giving the money straight away. But what I'm about is about people keeping more of their own money and not taking it in tax.
But you're opposed to handouts. You're on the record as saying you're opposed to handouts.
I've also said that I will have a temporary moratorium on the green energy levy, which will save everybody money on their fuel bills. But what we also have to do, Alistair, is address the root cause of why energy costs are so high. That's why it's important we stand up to Vladimir Putin and end this war in Ukraine. And that's why it's also important that we work with the energy companies to bring the prices down. And that is, I'm going to deal with supply. I'm going to help bring the prices down so we reduce the cost. Because if the only answer to everything is to whack up taxes and give out more benefits, then the country is going to run into trouble. And the fact is, we are predicted to have a recession.
Right, Neil,
and it's important that we grow the economy.
Rest your legs for a minute.
But I want to say to Neil that I will do everything I can to support working families who work hard and do the right thing. And if I'm elected as your Prime Minister, I will make sure the Chancellor has an emergency budget and looks at this issue in the round and sorts this issue out.
Tracy Lally, who is in customer service, lives with a 73-year-old mum. During winter, she has to heat her home for 10 hours a day and is, and I quote, terrified over how she will keep her mum warm this winter. By April, it'll be sorted, or will you still be sorting out in your own mind what a bailout is and what a tax cut is?
As I've said, Alistair, there would be an emergency budget under my government that would immediately look at these issues. And firstly, I will make sure that we reverse the national insurance rise, that we have a moratorium on the green energy levy and immediately save people money on fuel bills. I will also look at what can be done on supply to make sure we're keeping prices as low as possible so that families right across this country, pensioners, are not struggling. Now, we don't yet have a new Prime Minister. That happens in September. So I can't announce exactly what I will do at this stage.
But you are not ruling out further bailouts in addition to your tax reforms.
What I am determined to do is to help people across this country through what will be a very difficult winter.
Can I just ask you
my first preference is always not to take the money off people in the first place.
But one quick one, because you introduced it about the oil companies. You used to work for Shell. It's an industry that you know, and you know how it works. Somebody else that you admire, Margaret Thatcher, also said you can't buck markets. They're charging the world price. That's why they're making obscene profits. They're doing what they're supposed to do on behalf of their shareholders. Will you change that?
Well, we can change things with the oil and gas industry. So, for example, I support fracking in areas where there is local support for it. I support extracting more gas from the North Sea. I support moving ahead faster with nuclear power. So we are energy independent, because one of the problems we're facing is Vladimir Putin is using the fact that Europe is dependent on Russian gas to try and leverage that against Europe, and we can't allow that to happen. So making sure we're energy independent and dealing with the supply issues is an important part of the solution.
All right, let's move it on now, because we are 15 minutes into our 1 hour, and I want to try and leave some time at the end, if I can. The other huge volume of traffic we had by way of email and letters from folk was about tackling illegal immigration. And we have a question from Philip Orr. Philip, could you come to the microphone, sir?
Thank you. Oh, Liz, hi.
Hi.
I hope you got the email right for the dress code. Yeah, I'm a Conservative Party member, but I've not made my mind up yet who to vote for. Hence why I'm here today. As of Monday, 18,500 illegal immigrants have crossed the English Channel since this year. At the same time last year, it was 9,500 less. We have a population growth in the UK over the last 10 years, which has grown by 4 million. That's despite the 500,000 people that have overstayed visas or have just disappeared into communities. This obviously is having a massive impact on public services like education, health service and housing. I want you to tell me what you are going to do to try and curb immediately what's this influx of illegal criminals, if you like, because that's what they are. They're coming into this country. We don't know where they're from. They're destroying their credentials. Last week, some of them were caught with weapons, a gun.
All right,
so that's what I want to know. What are you immediately going to do?
Liz.
So what is happening in the English Channel is absolutely appalling. We've got people traffickers using boats that are not seaworthy to try and get illegal immigrants into this country, and it is destroying lives, and it is a huge criminal operation that we need to stop. And that is why I worked with Priti Patel and others on the Rwanda policy to find a safe place where people could live, where if people are entering the country illegally, we can then send those people to Rwanda. And what I would do, if I'm elected as your Prime Minister, is make the Rwanda policy work by, through the British Bill of Rights, ensuring that we can't be overruled by the ECHR. Because you know that's been a problem, that we had the ruling from the ECHR and that stopped the policy going ahead. So I would make sure we legislate for Britain that we are in control of our own policy and we can't be overruled by the ECHR.
Philip.
I would also work with other countries to get new deals to find new locations, because what is really important is that countries like Rwanda want citizens in their country helping build their economy. They don't want a massive brain drain of people, but we need to work with them to make that happen and ensure there is somewhere for the illegal immigrants to go.
Philip, what do you make of what you've heard from Liz?
One other thing as well is that we've got the French who have been completely uncooperative with this.
You don't say.
And what I think should happen, and it's well within the Brexit bill when it came out, is to revoke French fishing licences. If you do that, that focuses their attention on helping us on their side of the channel to stop people coming over in the first place. And also as well, we shouldn't be sending planes full of people to Rwanda. There should be ships. Those ships should be stationed in the English Channel so they go straight there. And if they've got no credentials, no ID, they go straight on the boat to Rwanda.
Philip, bear with me just for 2 seconds. If I may, Liz, add, this is from one of the Daily Mail readers who's joined in our conversation, a woman called Penny, who says, would Liz Truss consider turning the boats around and immediately returning them to France, as Philip is alluding to?
So just on the subject of the French, I did have a very tough conversation with the French Foreign Minister 2 weeks ago, because the French are not putting enough staff on the borders at Dover to deal with the long backlogs. And I will be very clear and robust in my negotiations with the French. I think you've seen on the Northern Ireland Protocol that when we didn't get what we needed to change the protocol and restore peace and stability in Northern Ireland, then I got the protocol bill through Whitehall and I got it through the House of Commons. So I am prepared to take robust action with the French and with the EU to get things done. But, you know, on the subject of the illegal immigration, you know, I will use the most cost-effective method of making sure people are going to Rwanda. And you know, I know that Priti Patel has looked at this a lot at the Home Office, and flights were the most effective way of doing that. The issue is at the moment that what is happening is people are getting on the phone to their lawyers when they're just about to take off, and they're using the European Court of Human Rights to stop it. So that is the issue we need to deal with.
Philip,
final point. Why can't we use, for trade and everything, use Dutch ports instead of always using Calais? The backlogs there are there, but they're being man-made by the French. Why don't we use other ports to bring our goods and services into the country? because it's they've got us over the barrel, the French.
I completely agree with you.
Bit of a trade war brewing here, Liz.
I absolutely agree with you, and I love the old Hanseatic League, and I'm an MP in Norfolk, and we've got fantastic ports like King's Lynn, which we should be using, and we should be restoring some of those old trade links. And what I'm about is building new trade opportunities with countries like India. So we are just about to do a trade deal with India, lots of opportunities to export there, and those are the growth markets of the world. The fact is the European Union isn't growing very fast. There are lots of other countries around the world that we can do more trade with, and I very much agree with you.
Just to finish, I really do hope that this gets sorted out, because for years immigration, this government and previous governments have just used sticking plaster politics to get things sorted out. They haven't actually said we're going to do this, we're going to do that. It's all given lip service, and I hope something is going to get done, because
there's a bit of an agenda there. You and others will reflect upon it, but I'm going to move it on now.
Yeah, sure.
But no, brilliant contribution, Philip, and thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you.
You've talked quite a bit already about stuff that you want to be doing, like the emergency budget, like working with other countries to progress further on the post-Brexit arrangements, and that depends upon the team that you will select if you are successful. And Jane Knight has a brilliant question on that. Jane Knight.
Thank you, Alistair. Liz. My background's people development, so teaching, training, coaching, mentoring. So I've worked with lots of leaders and teams in my time. The country is facing massive challenges at the moment. The government's a shambles. Boris seems to be demob happy, and the general public are wondering who's actually running things. And what I'd like to know is, what would you say are your key strengths as a leader, and how would you choose your team around you so that you really can hit the ground running, as you said, from the 5th of September?
Well, thank you. Brilliant question. So I think my strength is getting things done. And I will get things done by hook or by crook. And I will push them through Whitehall. I will make sure that things happen. And I've shown I've done that in the Department of Trade and also in the Foreign Office. But what I also do is I trust my team to deliver. And I think it's quite significant in this leadership election is I am being backed by a lot of my cabinet colleagues who work with me. And I'm also being backed by ministers that I've worked with in the Foreign Office and in the Trade Department, because I'm not somebody who micromanages. You can't do that. You can't do that as Foreign Secretary. You definitely can't do that as Prime Minister. And what you have to have is good people, be clear about what they're expected to deliver, but allow them to deliver it in the best way. So, for example, the health service. It's a massive challenge getting GP appointments sorted out, getting enough dentists, getting ambulance waiting times down. But that cannot be run out of number 10 Downing Street. That needs a good health secretary that can drive the decisions more locally. And what I will be looking for, if I am selected as Prime Minister, is 3 things in my team. First of all, people that are competent. Secondly, people that share our Conservative values and are prepared to stand up to Whitehall and get those values through. And the third thing is people that are loyal and don't spend their time briefing the press and talking to the press, spend their time getting on with the job. That's what's important to me.
What's your reaction to that? I particularly like the bit at the end about loyalty. You can read as much into that as you choose.
Well, loyalty, yes, but there's also a bit of risk-taking. So I would like to give some opportunity to maybe people that you might not know as well at the moment, and backbenchers, and certainly somebody who fired the imagination of the public was Kemi Badenoch, and I would really love to see her given a meaty role. I know you can't.
Do you have any ideas about what that role should be, Jane?
Oh, well, Foreign Secretary, if there might be a role going there.
Look, I don't want to get ahead of myself, and this leadership campaign is still going on, but I can tell you that I will make sure the best players in the Conservative Party are on the pitch. If I'm
And
elected as leader,
cabinet,
and
a leaner cabinet.
Well, I think we need all the cabinet positions filled because there's a lot to be done. But what I can promise is a leaner number 10.
Okay.
Because I don't believe in micromanagement. I think number 10 has become a bit too presidential, and we do need cabinet ministers to have both the authority and the responsibility for what they're delivering. And, you know, Kemi, I've worked with her as Women and Equalities Minister. You know, we've taken on a lot of the agenda of people who were trying to deny that women were women and so on. So I think she's absolutely brilliant, and I would definitely want her as part of my team if I am successful.
Jane, thank you very much indeed. Only on GB News can you get a negotiation between one of our brilliant viewers and...
I thought Jane was applying for a job herself,
I'm fully expecting you or one of your team to give her a bell afterwards and say, come and consult. Jane Knight, thank you very, very much indeed. Strikes in universities, people have talked about, the youngsters as well, but also concerns about industrial unrest. You mentioned nurses, the health service earlier, in the schools, and of course the railways. We have a question from Theo Murphin, particularly about the universities, but we may broaden it out. Where's Theo? There's Theo. Come down to the microphone. And over you go, sir.
Hi Liz, my question is regarding universities, because obviously we've had the pandemic, and before that universities were affected by strikes as well, and we've had the pandemic again where we're affected by strikes and the pandemic. You've said in your first 100 days you want to bring in legislation that was in our 2019 manifesto regarding strikes. Will this legislation be extended to include universities where students, again, are looking at another year of unrest and unease by lecturers who want to go and strike? Because, quite frankly, as a university student, I've suffered 2 years now of not being on campus.
Sure.
Can we?
And you're a customer now, which you weren't when I was at university.
No, so I'm paying £9,000 a year, and I'm not getting the service that I'm paying for.
But students have had a very, very raw deal during the pandemic, not getting face-to-face lectures, often having to pay for accommodation costs twice. And what I would make sure is universities are held to account for delivering that. Otherwise, they should have to give a refund to students who aren't getting what they paid for. On the legislation, what the legislation is about is making sure essential services like railway services are provided, and they can't be disrupted by military trade unions. Because what I am about is about being on the side of people who work hard, who turn up to work, who get on the train, not on the side of militant unions who often are pretty well paid. I mean, most train drivers are on over £50,000 a year, which is a pretty decent salary. But I will do all I can to make sure that universities are held to account and you get value for money for what you paid for.
And on that as well, obviously, we've got the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Bill before Parliament. And as a Conservative, I believe in freedom of speech and our values. But with the Online Safety Bill going through Parliament as well, we're going to see now two divides. We're going to see what we can say in person on campus protected, such as things as men are men and women are women, but we're going to see that we can't say that online with the Online Safety Bill. So can we see some direction, please, to where we can have what we can say in person, we can also say online and vice versa? Because as a university student, again, I've been silenced for some of my views as a Conservative.
Lots of heads in the audience nodding with that one, Liz.
You are right about that. You are right about that. What I want to make sure the Online Safety Bill does is protect the under 18s from content that is damaging. And I have two daughters who are aged 13 and 16, and I worry about some of the material that they can access online. I also worry about the impact of social media on them before they are yet fully adult and fully able to take responsibility. I very strongly agree with you, though, where it's about adults being able to speak freely, they absolutely should be, and it should be the same online as offline. That's a really important principle, and I'll make sure that the Online Safety Bill does reflect that.
Theo, thank you very much.
Thank you, Theo.
Thank you. Just a quick one before moving on to the next major question. That's Janice, who, again, is a Daily Mail reader, who sent in a question, which I think you nodded towards a little when you were answering Theo's first bit of the question. What action will you take to minimise future disruption caused to the general public by protests and industrial action by trade unions. I've read what you've got in mind legislatively, but when are you going to do it and how quickly?
Well, as soon as possible, I will legislate to make sure those essential services are provided and that we can't be disrupted by militant trade unions. I'm also very concerned by these extreme activists like Extinction Rebellion doing things like gluing themselves to trains and disrupting people who are trying to get to work. Of course, I support free speech. That's very important. But that is not the same as the endless disruption being caused by a very, very small minority. So I will also take steps to make sure that's dealt with.
All right. Thank you very much indeed. And again, my thanks to Janice, who's listening, and Theo for being with us. Child grooming. Big issue for many people who got in touch with us and wanted to ask a question about it. And Paul Eckersley is the person to whom that responsibility now falls. Paul, your question to Liz Truss.
Good afternoon, Liz. Thank you. My question is, in this current climate, what are you prepared to do to confront and bring to justice the perpetrators of the grooming gangs? Because it seems at the moment that we live in a society where the police will happily turn up at your doorstep if you have the audacity to insult someone on Twitter and slap you in handcuffs.
Yeah.
But if you're part of a grooming gang, they turn the other cheek. And that simply cannot be right. We do not have a two-tier policing or legal system. So what are you going to do as Prime Minister to enforce the law, which is already on the statutes, and bring criminals to justice, no matter who they are?
Well, you're absolutely right about the police should not be spending their time policing Twitter. They should be on the streets dealing with crime. And what I would put in place is police league tables so people could compare how well their police force was doing with others around the country. But on these child grooming gangs, it is absolutely repulsive what has gone on in places like Rotherham, in places like Telford. And of course, those criminals need to be brought to justice. But more than that, I want the people held to account, the council officers, the councillors and the police who didn't do anything about it, and even not just turned a blind eye, but actually condoned this behaviour. So they need to be held to account, because until those people understand that their role in this was, enabling those appalling crimes to be committed, I don't believe we will fully deal with that, and I will make sure that those people are gone after by the relevant authorities.
Okay.
Thank you. In his report upon this, Tom Crowther QC, in effect said, at the heart of it all is the truth that dare not speak its name, and that is for political correctness reasons that cropped up in the conversation with Theo earlier. They didn't have the bottle to say, actually, the majority of these crimes are committed by male Pakistani gangs, because that would cause racial tension. Will you stop that?
Absolutely, I will stop that. And what I will make sure is that those people who allowed that to happen are held to account. And we must never let this happen again. I mean, it's appalling that we first heard about the cases in Rotherham. We've since seen Oxford and Telford. And this isn't just something that is going on in specific local areas. This is something that is an endemic problem and needs to be addressed on a national level.
Yeah. OK, fine. Again, thank you very much indeed, Paul, and to everybody else. We are just over halfway through, warning to you and everybody else. So I'm going to change tack again. I know we haven't exhausted all of these subjects, but we want to get through as many as we possibly can. Housing. A number of people got in touch with us, not only housing for everybody, but particularly for younger people concerned about getting on the housing ladder. And Jessica Buckthorpe, where's Jessica? Is Jessica behind me? There you are, Jessica. Welcome. Your question to Liz Truss.
Yeah, it's lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Jessica.
So I'm a university student, and alongside battling with the strikes, I also have a job, which some weeks I work up to 30 hours, partially in a bid to help fund living costs, but also because I'm extremely concerned that I will never be able to become a homeowner given the high deposits and everything like that. Passing affordability assessments, which I know you've addressed, is one hurdle. But do you have any plans in place to actually aid first buyers both saving and placing their deposits in a house, given rates of inflation and spiralling rent costs, which are making this increasingly difficult?
Thanks, Jessica.
Well, Jessica, I want more young people to be able to afford to get on the housing ladder. So what I'm proposing is that people's rental history contributes towards them being able to get a mortgage, which should enable more people who rent to be able to get the mortgage and be able to get on the housing ladder. But what we also need to do is sort out the appalling planning system we've got in this country. I've been a local councillor on a planning committee. It was a pretty dispiriting experience because every time I was overruled by Whitehall or by the planning inspectorate in Bristol. And what I want to do is give much more control to local communities, abolish top-down targets, and instead enable local communities to develop the homes that they need as quickly as they need them. And we should have different systems in places like Leigh, Manchester, London, because there are very different circumstances. But at the moment, the whole system is just incredibly frustrating and takes far, far too long. So I want to empower local communities to get on with building homes for local people.
Is it the role of the state, the government, to help her get a mortgage?
Well, it's the role of the government to make sure that our planning system is actually delivering for people across the country.
Gathering together, as she said herself, she's working in a golf club, extra jobs as a student, but she's finding it tough to actually get that deposit that opens the door to the bank or the building society. Is it your job as Prime Minister to help her with that?
Well, at the moment, the government regulates all these things. It regulates mortgages, it regulates pensions, so the government is involved, one way or the other. And what I'm saying is the government involvement should be positive. It should be enabling people to be able to get mortgages, particularly young people who want to get on the housing ladder. And we shouldn't be creating all these barriers and hurdles which are there at the moment.
OK. Do you want to come back to this briefly?
Yeah, I was just sort of thinking, because it is a problem with actually saving deposits. I feel like, for me personally, it seems like a pipe dream that I'm ever going to be able to get enough money for, say, 10 years' time.
Where do you want to buy a home? Whereabouts?
Well, I think that's very dependent on where I go after my degree.
Where are you thinking at the moment?
London would be, like I say, a pipe dream, because the rent, buying a house is just unimaginable. But it's just with stuff like actually saving. I think with inflation, the money that I'm trying really hard to save now, in 10 years' time, might be not worth even near enough to put a deposit down. So it was just mainly that. And I think that the help with the renting and everything like that, I think that's a brilliant idea. I think it's definitely making it more accessible. But I still think it's the actual mortgage deposit, which is the key issue.
Yeah, absolutely. But this is why we need to allow people to use their rental history to be able to get a mortgage. On inflation, we've had a massive shock to the global economy because of COVID, because of the war in Ukraine. But it's important we keep a grip on inflation. But inflation is forecast to peak this year and then come down afterwards. So, it's important we grip inflation. I fully support, the monetary policy the Bank of England has set out, but we shouldn't bake that into the future. I think it's really important we get inflation down so that we can, help you get on the housing ladder.
Well, there's a smile there. Jessica, thank you very much indeed. I hope there was some food for thought and some optimism there, but thank you very much for coming along there, Jessica Buckthorpe. From one end of the age spectrum, as it were, to another end of the spectrum, and I was genuinely surprised at the number of emails and messages we got about war widows, which is something that you've addressed, but also particularly about the WASPy women and a continuing crisis that they feel themselves about rule changes and how it impacts upon their pensions. Patricia Morgan can say it, I think, much better and more clearly than I can. Patricia, your question to Liz.
Thanks, Liz, for bringing some sunshine to Leigh, but we're not used to it. So
it's always sunny every time I come to Leigh. I don't know what it is.
Right, well, I was born in 1955, so that's the biggest clue. I am a WASPy woman. I was born here in Leigh, as was my dad, but my mum was from where you are at the moment, from Norwich in Norfolk. So she lived all her life in Leigh. She got a pension at 60. Nobody changed the goalposts when mum was waiting for her pension. We, however, as you know, have had the rug pulled from underneath us after many of us working from being 15 or 16 years of age, not going into the labour market at 20, 21, 22. We've worked for 40 years, 45 years, only to find that we then have to wait an additional 6 years for the pensions that we were promised when we were 60. Boris Johnson, when he was in your shoes, said he would look at this injustice with fresh eyes. He also added there was no magic money tree, but there's been a veritable orchard over the last couple of years, what with Brexit and COVID, and money's been there for everything else. And we feel disrespected, undervalued. We feel that a country that can treat its older people like this is not a civilised country that values the contribution that we've made.
Patricia, thank you for that very much. Closed case, or you've heard what she said on behalf of many women. Is it a case that you will reopen and look at?
I have huge sympathy for WASPy women, and in fact, I've had many representations in my surgery in Norfolk on this subject, and I do think, in the pensions and tax system, we haven't looked after women fairly, and women have suffered. I do think it's a problem. One thing that I have said I will do is review our overall tax system to make it fairer for families, to make it fairer for people who take time out of work to look after children or look after elderly relatives. But on the, to be honest with you, and I have to be honest, on the specific case of the WASPy women, I don't think it was handled very well at the time. I completely admit that, and there wasn't enough respect shown. I very much agree with that. But I think where we are now, it will be very difficult to go back. So, I'm sorry but I have to be honest about the situation of where we are now.
Not the answer you would want to hear, but actually an honest answer.
But what about over a year ago, the Parliamentary Health Service Ombudsman ruled that there had been maladministration and recommended fair and fast retribution. Will you support what the Ombudsman has, after 6 years of investigation, agreed is
Liz.
what we are due?
I really just don't want to make promises I can't keep, to be absolutely
That
honest
sounds like
with
a no.
you. Well, and what I don't want to do is make promises and not be able to find the funding and also reopen the issue. As I've said, going forward, I do want to make the system fair for women. I do want to make the system fair for families. I agree with you. It wasn't handled well, and I regret that was the case. I think it was back actually in the days of the coalition government. But I'm not able. I'm really sorry. I'm not able to promise you that. Sorry about that.
Sometimes,
it's been like that
but
for 6
I think
years.
you, like me, would rather have an honest answer than some
An
nonsense
honest answer
about what
is
might
good,
happen.
but a positive answer would have been much more appreciative to women who will now have to really choose between eating
Fully
and
understood, and you put the point extremely well, Patricia, and thank you. Thanks, Liz, as well. I mentioned in passing in the introduction to Patricia's question, war widows. In 2018, you promised a group of war widows that you would right a wrong, namely that you would reinstate their war widow pensions, which were taken away after they remarried, although the laws changed in 2015. 300 war widows fell through the gap. Is that something that you will revert to if you become Prime Minister?
Well, this is something I looked at as Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and I remember I was in discussions with the Ministry of Defence when Boris Johnson was elected as leader, and I got moved into a different job. But I certainly will look at that, and I will look at that issue, because I do think it is very, very unfair that war widows who then remarry are essentially penalised. So I will look at that issue.
On the record, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you very much indeed. The Health Service attracted a huge range of questions, but one of the most common was brilliantly articulated by Janine Ronaldson. Janine, would you make your way to the microphone, please, and put your question to Liz Truss?
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
I've been a registered nurse for 31 years, following 3 years training. I now work in the community working on admission avoidance. But there's been an increasing amount of registered nurses vacancies in the NHS with reduced uptake of the training, and many nurses are leaving the profession due to stress, increased workload, pension changes and several years of below inflation pay awards. How will you address these issues regarding recruiting and retaining nurses, taking into consideration the diminished salary over many years?
Thank you, Janine.
Thank you, Janine, and thanks for the work you do as a nurse. It's incredibly important. What I want to do is make sure, and I talked earlier about appointing the right health secretary if I'm selected as Prime Minister to do this, but really make sure that we are empowering the front line. You know, what you're talking about, the stress and the work pressures, sometimes, or certainly I hear from nurses, sometimes comes from a feeling that there's central diktat about what people have to do, rather than people being able to use their own judgment on the ground level in the health service. So I'd want to make things work better in the health service. I'm committed to the extra funding, but I wouldn't get that out of a national insurance rise. I would get that out of general taxation. We'd still be able to pay the debt down after 3 years. I also think that funding needs to go into social care. So we're freeing up beds in the National Health Service to deal with the patients who need to be dealt with. But there's no doubt in my mind that we face a massive challenge as a country, because a huge backlog built up after COVID. And you know, what we need to do is value those frontline professionals and make sure, you know, both nurses and doctors don't feel that they have to leave the profession. And you mentioned pensions. I do want to look at those pensions because, you know, there are issues about the cut-offs, which sometimes make it harder for people to stay in the profession. But what I'd also do is I would listen to people, and I make sure the health secretary is listening to people, because it seems to me that something isn't working because the money's going in, but we're not seeing the impact of that money on the front line. So I'd very much want to hear your views on that.
Go on then.
I think. I mean, the hospitals are actually in crisis, aren't they? Because of social care, because of COVID, they're not discharging patients as they should be able to. We're trying to keep them out. We take ambulance calls and things like that to try and take on that care instead of them hitting the A&E department. But there's just lack of funding, lack of doctors, and a lot of nurses my age are retiring when they're 55, where they'd have probably stayed on a bit longer, but now the pensions change. You're thinking,
Are you? Can I just butt in across to you and then Liz come in on it? But are you also conscious, doing what you do, and thank you, as Liz said to you, for what you do, of the staggering number of vacancies that there are, folk who should be working alongside you but no longer join in the numbers that they used to? Are you aware of that yourself?
Yes. It's very hard to get staff and even like people that are you know, going for jobs and things like that. There's not as many applications anymore. And, you know, like Band 5 nurses, they'll go into something, they'll think, we're overworked, I can go and get a Band 5 somewhere else. So then they move on instead of increasing and keep staying with that team.
And I think also that during COVID, a lot of people came out of retirement to help out. They came and helped with the vaccines, they came to help, and now they've gone back into retirement. So I think there is a question of how could we encourage some of those people, because we are facing a very, very difficult situation. You know, it's a one-off situation because of the backlog caused by COVID. So I'm also interested in what we can do to encourage some of those people who might have left the profession, you know, who came back to help with COVID.
Or like the doctors stay on a wee bit longer.
How could we get them to help out in a very difficult situation? Because at the moment, as you rightly say, there's just huge pressure on those who are in hospitals, those who are in GP surgeries as well.
I mean, there's a couple of my GP colleagues, they're up to the maximum on the pension, so they'll be leaving in the next 12 months.
This is a massive issue.
Janine, merely to echo for the final time, thank you very much for what you do, and thanks for coming along this evening. Janine Ronaldson there. I'm being told in my ear we've got about 7 minutes left, and what I want to do now is... they knew immediately. My mind-reading friends. I'm going to come to you in a moment with our Have we got the boom microphone still? You put your hand up way, way back in the midst of quite a feisty exchange. I think it was on either immigration or border control. Have you now heard what you needed to hear, or do you want to put a question to Liz Truss? You, sir. Yeah. You had your hand up earlier on. Yeah. Go on. Say who you are and pop your question to Liz Truss.
I am Councillor Liam Billington. I'm from Tameside, and it was actually on the CSC issue. I neighbour Oldham Council, and the Conservative councillors there, along with the Independents, have been asking for an independent inquiry into CSE. The Labour Party and Andy Burnham keep on denying the public that and keep on voting down the motions. Will you, as Prime Minister, promise those people that there will be a public inquiry for the residents of Oldham and Rochdale? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Liz?
Well, look, I would need a bit of time to think about it, but as I've said, I do think we need to hold to account those officials and those elected councillors who essentially condoned this type of behaviour. But let me have a think about it, and I will come back to you. But it seems to me that if we are to stop this appalling abuse happening again, we need to find out what the root causes, and some kind of inquiry does sound like the right way forward to me.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Gentleman who's coming around behind me now. There you go. I love a guy who knows he's on live television.
Oh, right.
Ducking and diving between the cameras. Tell us who you are if you'd like to, and your question to Liz Truss.
My name's Tony Briley. I've heard a lot tonight, this afternoon, about hard-working families. I was an hard-working family, and then I had to give up to become a carer, and I now work just as hard for just under £70 a week. It's a terrible crime in this country that there are over 1.5 million people in receipt of carers allowance, doing a job where we actually give back to the NHS because we're stopping this waterfall of money that could have gone out to us. I was wondering what this government and previous governments are going to do about that, and can we address this terrible injustice where people like myself and millions of others who are in a lot worse position than me, who were going on to less than £70, I am now using my life savings on top of my benefits and my wife's benefits. It's an absolute scandal. What will you do about that if you become leader of this?
Thank you, sir.
Well, can I just say, first of all, thank you for what you do, because it's incredibly important, and it's clearly much better if people are looked after by their families rather than ending up, elsewhere. That is the best support. Families are the bedrock of society. What I've already said, and I mentioned this earlier, is I want to look at the tax system to make sure it better supports families who do take time out to care for elderly relatives or care for children. And I'd have to look at how that worked with the benefit system as well, and what you're talking about on the carers allowance. But there's no doubt in my mind that not only are you doing a great thing for society, you're also saving the government money. So we need to look at that in the round and make sure that we are not penalising people who do what you do.
If you include in it when you come back whether you're satisfied that what Liz is saying there is, and she's referred to it twice now, a major review of the tax system, which is big beer.
This is the problem. If you're going to, we hear this all the time: tax, tax, tax. If you're on carers allowance, it's not about the tax. It is a benefit. I paid into this system. I was an irate taxpayer for the last few years before I finished. So it's not really about tax. I think there's something like 10 million people caring in this country now, and going on for 2 million of those, if I'm not mistaken, are now getting this benefit, £70. It shouldn't be happening, and it can't be addressed with just the tax system alone, because it's a benefit.
I appreciate that.
Also a structural review, but also that specific concern.
It's also the lowest benefit of all benefits, £70 a week. And I'm fortunate that my wife's still mobile and we can do things. But I sit on forums, I work with the Action for Pulmonary Fibrosis, which is my wife's particular illness. We can't do this on £70 a week.
Very quick response, Liz.
I mean, my response is that, on the overall issue of caring and social care, first of all, I want to make sure the money goes to the councils so that they are helping with immediate issues. but we do need to look at the system overall and make sure the system works. And I know that successive governments have grappled with this issue, but my principle, which is very much to support what you're doing and to support people to stay with their families and support carers as much as we can. Now, I don't have a detailed answer about exactly how we would do that or how we would finance and afford
Is it that we don't have detailed answers? This has been brought up time and time again with progress. We're not in the position where we, as carers, because it's not really about the money, we can't withdraw our labour, we don't go on strike, we do it through compassion, through love.
Absolutely.
That's the reason we do it. All we're asking for is a fair crack of a whip.
I'm just saying to you that I don't have an instant answer for something that has been an issue for many years, but I am committed to looking at it. And what I am really committed to is making sure we support families that do the right thing.
Thank you, sir.
OK, thank you.
Thank
Very
you.
good of yeah. And again, if you're a little closer to the microphone, if you're prepared to, let us know who you are and your question to Liz Truss.
My name's Trevor Bell, and I'm just asking, how can any government in the current situation justify keeping VAT on gas and electric? It was a Brexit promise that we would be free to get rid of that tax. It should go now.
Well, but believe me, I am not a fan of taxes in general, as you can tell, and I've already committed that I will reverse the national insurance rise. I've already committed to the temporary moratorium on the green energy levy. But of course, I have said that there will be a budget coming up, on an urgent basis to deal with the issues we face. And all of these issues need to be under consideration. But, we currently have a 70-year tax high in this country. And I don't think that is working for people. It's not working for businesses. It's not bringing investment into the country. I can't make any specific promises to you, and I can't... Look, I'm sure you appreciate, much as I love GBNews, much as I love Lee, I can't write the Chancellor who I haven't yet appointed for a job that I haven't yet got. I can't write his or her budget for them now. So that's all I'm saying. But if you're asking me...
No, I'm asking you this. If you lose to Rishi, he gets what he wants. VAT on energy.
Well,
I want taxes, the taxes that fuel inflation on gas, electricity, petrol, diesel. They fuel inflation.
Could I just say...
Get rid of them.
Getting rid of the green levy will reduce bills by just as much as getting rid of VAT. So it's the same effect.
And you can't afford to do both.
What this gentleman is asking is, am I willing to do more? And all I can say at this stage is my preference, when it is affordable, is to always have lower taxes. That is my preference because that is the best way to support people. What I don't agree with is taking money off people and then giving it back to them in benefits.
Sir, thank you very much indeed. Liz, thank you. And if, again, you'd be kind enough, close to the microphone, who you are, your question to Liz Truss.
My name's Shelley Guest. What I wanted to ask you was James Grundy, in the first round of voting for you, said he had a non-negotiable requirement, and that was that you would vote and support Lexit, which is his way of saying...
I know about Lexit.
Yeah, Lee breaking away from Wigan Council. How can you...
I'm only going to butt in for 10 seconds. Folk looking at home and listening at home need to understand that this is one of those ultimately local issues. But I can tell you, having been here all afternoon, it really, really matters. So a local government reform that these guys and gals here in Lee desperately want, but also more generally, take her question as a platform to tell us what you do as a former councillor about local government.
I want to know how it would benefit the people of Lee, and how is it not going to raise our council tax if we became independent from a bigger council?
Well, councils are about local communities and about the communities people feel part of. And the fact is, there's been too much local government reform that has been top-down and created, mayors in areas that people don't want it, housing targets where people don't want the homes, and council areas where people don't feel that that is part of the community that they're in. and they don't feel akin to. And, you know, look, I've spoken to James a lot about this. He is very much a big proponent of Lexit and the independent Republic of Lee. You know, he's a passionate, I think there's some other passionate advocates for it here. But what I have said to him is that we do need to look at local government, and we do need to make sure it's local as possible, and we do need to make sure people have control over decision-making powers. And sometimes these arguments are made that it's much better to have a mega authority, it's much more efficient, it will save people money. But if it takes power away from people, and if they feel it's being exercised by a distant authority, then it just doesn't work. So, you know, I will obviously consult the people of Lee, you know, and I will appoint if I'm selected as Prime Minister, appoint a local government secretary that is able to look at that. But James has certainly put a very strong case to me.
It just seems that the costs of going independent are going to be phenomenal and will cost the individual resident.
All right. I'm going to bank that one. And thank you very, very
Thank
much
you.
indeed. I promised you and your people faithfully I wouldn't be asking you about what the naughtiest thing you'd done running through hayfields or any of that such nonsense.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that.
But my final question
Can we terminate
comes...
this interview now?
That would make great telly. This one comes from Mel, and Mel speaks on behalf of a large number of people. How do you feel about cats? And in particular, could you describe what you hope your relationship will be with Larry in Number 10 if you are successful?
So I already have an extremely positive relationship with Larry. I think he frequently sidles up to me. I think I'm one of his preferred cabinet ministers. And you know, one of the many reasons I want to be Prime Minister is I want to build on that friendship that we already have.
Palmerston, kiss and bye-bye.
Yeah.
Palmerston's Foreign Office cap.
Palmerston actually left the Foreign Office. He left the Foreign Office during COVID. He worked from home.
Did he get a note from? Did he get a note from Jacob Rees-Mogg? Ladies and gentlemen, please join me before I say thank you to the folk at home in thanking Liz Truss for an hour of her time.
Thank you. Thank you, Alistair.
And my thanks as well.
Thank you.
You at home have been watching and listening to the People's Forum with Liz Truss, live from Lee here on GB News. We'll be holding another in the coming weeks with her rival Rishi Sunak. But do stay with us. Right now, Michelle Dewberry will be here next with an instant reaction, analysis and further debate. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news.
Thanks, Alistair. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Liz Truss says she would reverse the national insurance rise on day one of her premiership. However, it may take months to introduce. Taking questions from GB News' viewers in Lee as part of the People's Forum, the Tory leadership candidate said she would also address the root cause of why energy bills are so high, and she would stand up to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Ms Truss says we shouldn't be taking money from people in taxes and giving it back to them in benefits.
I would reverse the national insurance rise, and I'd also have a temporary moratorium on the green energy levy.